I never thought I'd end up here, writing about the relationship that nearly broke me. I'm 28 now, and looking back, it feels like I've spent so much of my adult life in a toxic relationship, caught in a cycle I couldn't escape. I don't even know where to start, but I guess I'll begin with how it all seemed perfect at first. His name was Liam. We met a few years ago, right after I'd ended a long-term relationship. I was emotionally drained, unsure of who I was outside of that relationship, but Liam seemed like the guy who would bring all the excitement back. He was charming, funny, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world. It was the kind of attention I thought I deserved after everything I'd been through. I thought I was finally getting it right. He started off so sweet. There was no red flag in sight. We'd talk for hours, text throughout the day, and make plans for weekend getaways. I felt special, important. It was the kind of feeling that made me think, this is it, this is the one. And it was easy to fall for him. He was just the right mix of affectionate and confident. I didn't realize then that those things were the perfect mask for what was coming next. At first, it was small things, tiny things that I brushed off. He would make a joke about how I looked that day, not in a way that made me feel bad, but in a way that made me think it was all in good fun. Like when he'd say, I'd be proud to show you off to my friends, but you might be too much of a distraction. I'd laugh it off, but deep down, it didn't sit right with me. He'd comment on my clothes or how I did my hair, little things that, when combined, made me start second-guessing myself. But I didn't listen to those little voice warnings. It felt too good to be true. I thought, maybe I was being too sensitive, or he's just teasing me because he's comfortable with me. Things started to shift when we moved in together. I thought it would be this amazing next step in our relationship, a sign that things were getting serious. But instead of the excitement I imagined, I started feeling more and more suffocated. Liam was always around, and he always had an opinion on everything I did. From what time I went to bed to how I decorated our living room, nothing seemed to escape his judgment. It wasn't like he was outright controlling me at first. He never told me outright what I could or couldn't do. But it was the subtler things, the way he would talk about my friends, or how he'd roll his eyes when I wanted to do something on my own. He'd say, "I thought we were a team, Olivia. Why do you need to go out with them again?" Or, "Don't you want to spend time with me instead?" And little by little, I started distancing myself from the people I cared about. I told myself it was because he was right. Our relationship should come first, right? But the isolation began, and I couldn't see it. My friends started noticing, but I dismissed their concerns. I kept making excuses for him. He's just protective, I'd say. He really cares about me. I was so wrapped up in my own emotions, convincing myself that everything was fine, that I stopped noticing how much I was changing. Then came the emotional manipulation. That's when I started to lose myself completely. One night, after a casual argument about something trivial, like not putting my shoes away, Liam went silent. He didn't speak to me for hours. I tried reaching out, asking what was wrong, but he just gave me the cold shoulder. He wouldn't tell me what I did, but I knew it was something I had done wrong. The silence stretched on for days, and when he finally spoke to me again, it was like nothing had happened. He didn't apologize, but suddenly, everything was my fault. "You shouldn't have made me act like that," he said. "You made me upset, and now I'm the one who has to deal with it." I was left feeling guilty, even though I had no idea what I was apologizing for. It took a while for me to realize that this was a pattern. I would make mistakes, but I wasn't allowed to make them. He would punish me with silence, coldness, and then try to turn it around so that I felt like the one who owed him an apology. The worst part? It worked. Every time. The relationship started to feel like a game of survival. I never knew when I was going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, but I knew it would happen eventually. And when it did, I'd brace myself for the fallout. As the months went on, Liam's jealousy became more apparent. If I was talking to a guy at a party or laughing too loudly with a friend, he'd get quiet, distant, or worse. He'd start accusing me of things. "Why are you always so friendly with him? Do you want to be with him instead of me?" His questions didn't feel like questions. They felt like accusations. and it made me question myself, question my loyalty, and question my worth. But the most twisted part? He'd often follow those accusations with praise. But I'm lucky to have someone like you, Olivia. You're beautiful, smart, and I know you're not like the others. It was like he was reminding me of how lucky I was to have him, while also subtly making me feel guilty for something I hadn't even done. It was a mind game. He knew exactly how to pull me back in when I started to question his behavior. Things escalated over time. His need for control grew stronger. He would monitor my phone, ask who I was texting, and read through messages. If he found something that made him uncomfortable, even if it was just a harmless conversation with a friend, he'd explode. It wasn't just the yelling anymore. It was the way he made me feel like I was always on trial, yet always explaining myself. I remember one night, after I had a late meeting at work, he asked, "Who were you with? Who was that guy you were talking to?" When I told him it was a colleague, someone I worked closely with, he looked at me, almost like he didn't believe me. "Do you think I'm stupid?" he snapped. "Do you think I don't know what's really going on?" I was scared. I didn't know how to fix things. I couldn't explain myself enough to make him believe me. The more I tried to prove my innocence, the worse it got. I couldn't do anything right. By now, I was isolated from everyone. My friends had stopped inviting me to hang out because they knew I wouldn't show up. I was wrapped up in this toxic relationship where I felt like I couldn't breathe. But here's the thing about toxic relationships. You don't always know you're in one until you're so deep in it that it feels like there's no way out. I kept convincing myself that I was just being dramatic, that this was normal, but it wasn't. And I didn't realize how much damage had been done until it was almost too late. One day, everything finally hit a breaking point. I had been keeping track of how much time I spent trying to avoid Liam's temper, trying to keep the peace and ignoring my own needs. It had been building up for months, and I felt like I was walking on eggshells all the time. It was exhausting, mentally draining, and physically. I could barely get out of bed some days. I hadn't even realized how much I was losing myself until I looked in the mirror one morning. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. I looked tired, hollow, like I'd aged years in a matter of months. I was no longer the confident, independent woman I used to be. The stress had drained me, and I was starting to feel numb to the world around me. I started avoiding phone calls, even from my family. My mom would ask if I was okay, and I'd lie. "I'm fine, just busy." She could tell, though. I could see it in her eyes whenever I talked to her. She was worried. That day, I had a moment of clarity. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through social media while Liam was in the kitchen making dinner. My phone buzzed with a message from Amelia, one of my oldest friends. We had been close for years, but as I got deeper into my relationship with Liam, I stopped making time for her. "Olivia, we need to talk. I'm worried about you. I haven't heard from you in forever. Please, just call me when you can. Love you." The message stung. It was a wake-up call I wasn't ready for, but it was also the first sign of a lifeline. I hadn't realized how much I'd pushed away the people who cared about me. Amelia's message wasn't just a friendly check-in. It was a call for help, and it made me realize how much I had been neglecting everything else in my life. The people who loved me had been pushed aside while I gave all my energy to someone who was slowly suffocating me. I wasn't just losing myself, I was losing everyone around me too. But when I tried to think about what to do next, I froze. How do you leave a relationship like this? It wasn't as simple as just walking away. There were so many tangled emotions involved. I loved Liam, or at least I thought I did. Or maybe I was just addicted to the idea of love, of having someone in my life who made me feel needed, wanted, even if it wasn't in a healthy way. I thought about my friends, especially Amelia, and how much they had always supported me. But I hadn't been there for them. I hadn't been present, not really. I thought about my mom and how much she cared about me. I thought about how much I missed myself, how I used to be carefree, independent, someone who had dreams and goals, someone who laughed without worrying about what anyone else thought. That night, Liam and I had another argument. It was the same thing, small and pointless. He accused me of not paying enough attention to him, of not caring enough about his needs. And in the heat of it all, something inside me snapped. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I couldn't keep living in a relationship that was slowly killing me from the inside out. So, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I packed a bag, grabbed my phone, and texted Amelia, telling her I needed to talk. I didn't tell Liam I was leaving. I didn't owe him an explanation. The guilt I felt leaving him behind was real, but it wasn't stronger than the need to save myself. When I stepped out of that apartment, it was like I could breathe again for the first time in a long while. It felt terrifying, but also freeing. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Amelia was there within an hour. She didn't ask a single question when I walked through her door. She just hugged me tightly, like she knew everything I had been through. I broke down in her arms, all the tears I had been holding back for so long pouring out in waves. I cried for the Olivia I used to be, for the woman I had lost in the process of trying to keep someone else happy. I cried for the relationship I had held on to for so long, thinking I couldn't survive without it. But most of all, I cried because for the first time in what felt like forever, I was taking control of my life again. The days that followed were filled with questions, reflection, and uncertainty. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had space to think. I went back to therapy, which I had stopped going to when I started dating Liam. I called my mom and told her the truth, how I had been feeling, how I had been hiding things from her. She didn't judge me. She just told me she loved me and that she was proud of me for finding the strength to leave. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I missed Liam, even after everything. It's hard to break free from someone who had been so controlling, someone who had built their world around you. I struggled with guilt, and I kept wondering if I had made the right choice. But as the weeks passed, I started seeing the truth more clearly. I started recognizing that love wasn't supposed to feel like a prison. It wasn't supposed to be about pleasing someone else, about constantly proving your worth, about silencing your own voice to make someone else feel heard. I was slowly starting to rediscover who I was without him. I went to yoga classes, took long walks in the park, reconnected with old friends, and started finding joy in the small things. I learned to laugh again, truly laugh, without the nagging feeling that something was about to go wrong. Eventually, I looked back at the entire relationship and could finally admit something I had been in denial about for so long. It wasn't love. It was control. It was manipulation. It was fear. But it wasn't love. I don't know what the future holds. I'm still healing, still learning how to trust myself again. But I know one thing for sure. I won't let myself fall back into that cycle again. I won't settle for anything less than a relationship where both people are equals, where love is about support and growth, not control and fear. And to anyone out there who's in a relationship like the one I was in, please don't wait as long as I did to get out. You deserve better. You deserve to be seen, heard, and loved for who you truly are, not for who someone else wants you to be. You are worth it. The weeks that followed were full of ups and downs, but the most important part was that I was no longer in that toxic environment. I wasn't being constantly reminded that I wasn't enough, that I was too much, or that I needed to change to fit someone else's vision of me. For the first time in a long while, I was just Olivia, just myself, and that alone felt like a victory. I spent a lot of time reflecting on the relationship, trying to understand how I had let it go on for as long as I did. How did I let someone take away my voice and make me believe I wasn't worthy unless I was doing everything for them? I still don't have all the answers, but I know this. Love is not supposed to be about changing who you are for someone else. It's supposed to be a partnership where both people are respected for their individuality. It's about trust, not fear, and I had forgotten that somewhere along the way. One thing that helped was reconnecting with my passions. I had stopped doing things I loved, things I had once considered a core part of who I was, because Liam didn't share those interests. I stopped writing, which was something I used to do every day, because he didn't get it. He didn't see why I needed that outlet. It was always dismissed as a waste of time. But now, sitting alone in my room at Amelia's apartment, I realized how much I missed it. I took out my old journal and started writing again. The words flowed so easily, like they had been waiting for me to come back to them. At first, I felt guilty, like I was being selfish for taking time for myself. But I quickly realized that taking care of myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Writing helped me process everything I had gone through, and every sentence felt like a step toward reclaiming myself. It was like I was finding pieces of me I had buried for far too long. And it wasn't just writing. I started doing things that made me feel whole again. I went to art galleries, even though Liam had always made fun of my artsy side. I enrolled in cooking classes because I'd always wanted to learn how to make better meals, but that dream had been pushed aside. And the best part? I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I didn't have to justify why I wanted to do something or why it was important to me. It was just for me. I also started meeting up with old friends. Friends I hadn't seen in months, maybe even years. Amelia, of course, was my first stop. She'd been there for me through everything, and I felt like I owed her so much for sticking by me even when I shut her out. When I finally sat down with her and told her everything, truly everything, I felt the weight of the past few years lift off my chest. She was supportive, as always, but also pointed out something I hadn't realized. I had stopped living for myself. I had started living for Liam, and I had lost who I was in the process. There was a moment during one of our talks when Amelia said, "Olivia, you were always strong, but you lost sight of that. You've always been someone who knew what she wanted. Somewhere along the way, you let someone else define your life." And she was right. Somewhere, I had let someone else take the reins. I had let Liam dictate my happiness, my choices, and even my future. But no more. I was done being defined by someone else's version of me. The next step was harder. It was about truly letting go. Liam had tried to reach out a few times, sending text messages and even calling me. But I knew deep down that talking to him again would just drag me back into the same unhealthy cycle. It was tempting. Sometimes the familiarity of his voice made me nostalgic for the good times we had, the moments when it felt like he really cared. But those moments were few and far between, and I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. I had to cut him out of my life completely. I blocked his number. I unfriended him on social media. It felt brutal at first, like I was erasing a chapter of my life, but it was necessary. I needed space. I needed to heal without him lingering in the background, reminding me of everything that went wrong. Every time I saw his name pop up on my phone, I felt that old pull to explain myself, to make him understand, to somehow fix things. But the truth was, there was nothing to fix. The relationship was broken, and the only way to move forward was to let it go completely. At first, I struggled. The loneliness hit hard. There were nights when I missed the comfort of having someone around, even if that someone was toxic. It was easy to forget the bad times and focus on the moments that seemed good. But I had to remind myself that those good moments were the illusion. The reality was that I had been living in a constant state of anxiety, walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace while losing myself in the process. The more time passed, the more I realized how much I'd been holding on to nothing. I had been clinging to the idea of what the relationship could be, not what it actually was. And once I let go of that, I started seeing things clearly. But the most important thing was learning to love myself again. I spent a lot of time focusing on my needs. What made me happy, what brought me peace, and what inspired me. I began taking long walks, journaling, and focusing on my physical health. I went to therapy regularly and talked about the trauma I had experienced. I allowed myself to grieve, but also to grow. And one of the hardest things to come to terms with was understanding that my self-worth had never been tied to anyone else. For so long, I had relied on someone else's approval, but I had forgotten that I was worthy of love and respect just for being me. I didn't need anyone to validate my existence. I started to look forward to the future, something I hadn't been able to do in so long. The fear of being alone started to fade. I realized that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. I wasn't missing anything. I was learning to be complete on my own. And you know what? I became excited about the possibility of love again. Genuine love. Not the kind that was about control, manipulation, and insecurity, but the kind that was based on mutual respect, trust, and kindness. I didn't need to rush into anything. I was okay with taking my time. As I moved forward, I started to feel this new kind of peace settling into my life. It was like I was learning how to breathe again after holding my breath for so long. I wasn't just recovering from the relationship with Liam, I was rediscovering who I had been before it all started, the person I had lost sight of. It felt like getting back to basics, getting back to the roots of who I was at my core. I spent a lot of time focusing on things that gave me joy, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I started taking photography classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. It became an outlet for my creativity, a way to express myself that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. The first time I took a photo, I was truly proud of. I felt like I had rediscovered a part of myself that had been buried under years of self-doubt. The healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt like I was back to square one, missing Liam, questioning my decisions, wondering if I was too harsh, if I had overreacted. But then I would remind myself why I left. I remembered the emotional manipulation, the constant criticism, the way he made me feel small, insignificant. I still remembered his voice, his accusations, his silence that seemed to stretch on forever, like a punishment. I remembered the nights I stayed up, feeling like I was walking on a tightrope, not knowing when I'd fall. And then I realized that it wasn't love. It was fear. It was control. And no amount of nostalgia could change that. The real breakthrough came one evening as I was sitting by myself on the balcony of Amelia's apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a warm summer evening, and the world felt still. I had just finished one of my photography classes and had my camera beside me. I felt this calm wash over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the weight of someone else's expectations. I didn't feel trapped by the idea that I had to live up to someone else's standards of happiness. It was in that moment that I realized something important. I had to forgive myself. I had spent so much time blaming myself for everything that had gone wrong. I kept thinking that I should have known better, that I should have seen the red flags sooner, that I should have left when the first warning signs appeared. But the truth was, I wasn't weak. I wasn't stupid. I was just doing the best I could with what I knew at the time. I had been in a relationship where my emotions were manipulated, where love was conditional. But now, I was learning that love wasn't supposed to feel like a prison. It was supposed to make you feel safe, accepted, and free to be your true self. I had to forgive myself for allowing someone to take that away from me. I also realized that healing wasn't about forgetting what happened. It wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending it didn't affect me. Healing was about acknowledging it, learning from it, and moving forward. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth and realizing that I deserved better. I deserved peace. That realization didn't come easily. It took a lot of painful reflection, long nights, and honest conversations with myself. But when I finally embraced it, everything began to shift. I stopped apologizing for things I hadn't done wrong. I stopped making excuses for other people's behavior. And most importantly, I stopped believing that I needed someone else to define who I was. I began dating again, but this time, it was different. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I wasn't looking for validation. I was looking for someone who could add to my happiness, not someone who could dictate it. I took things slow, learning to trust again, not just in other people, but in myself. The first few dates were awkward, as they always are when you're getting to know someone, but they didn't feel forced. They didn't feel like a performance. I found myself laughing again, genuinely. I wasn't scared of saying something wrong or worried about what the other person thought of me. I was just being me, and that felt incredible. I also started taking better care of my physical health. I began working out again, something I had stopped doing during my relationship with Liam. I wasn't doing it to look a certain way or to meet anyone's expectations. I was doing it because it made me feel strong and empowered. Every drop of sweat felt like a release, like I was shaking off the past piece by piece. As I started rebuilding my life, I felt a new sense of purpose growing inside me. I wasn't waiting for a man to make me feel whole. I wasn't waiting for anyone to come and fix me. I was fixing myself. I was learning how to stand on my own 2 feet, and that was the most empowering thing I'd ever done. Eventually, I reconnected with my family, especially my mom. She had always been there for me, but I had distanced myself from her while I was with Liam. I realized how much I had taken her love and support for granted. My mom had always told me, "You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. Don't ever settle for less." I didn't listen to her then, but now I understood exactly what she meant. I apologized to her for shutting her out, and we talked openly about everything I'd been going through. It was a difficult conversation, but it was also cathartic. My mom told me something that I'll never forget. "Olivia, no matter what, I will always be proud of you. You are stronger than you realize, and I know you'll find your happiness again, but only if you learn to love yourself first." That hit me harder than I expected. Learning to love myself first. I had spent so many years trying to please others, trying to be the perfect girlfriend, the perfect partner, the perfect everything. But I had neglected myself in the process. Now, I was finally starting to understand what my mom had meant. True happiness didn't come from the approval of others. It came from within. As the months passed, I started feeling more like myself again. I found myself smiling at random moments, enjoying the small things in life. I laughed at silly jokes, spent time with friends, and worked on my personal goals. I even took a solo trip to a small coastal town I had always wanted to visit. I walked along the beach, breathed in the salty air, and felt completely free. It was the first time I had ever traveled alone, and it felt incredible to do something just for me, without worrying about anyone else's opinion. I met someone new a few months later. His name was Elijah, and he was different from anyone I had ever dated before. There was no pressure, no manipulation, no mind games. We clicked naturally, and the best part was that he respected my boundaries and valued me for who I was. But even with Elijah, I didn't rush into anything. I knew I needed to take my time to make sure that I wasn't seeking validation from someone else. I was whole on my own now, and I wanted a partner who would respect that and bring something equally meaningful to the relationship. It's still a work in progress. I don't have all the answers, and I don't expect to. But for the first time in a long while, I feel hopeful. I feel like I'm moving forward, not stuck in the past. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why I stayed in that toxic relationship for so long. I may never fully comprehend the dynamics of it all. But I do know this: I'm stronger for having gone through it. It taught me what I never want again. And more importantly, it taught me what I deserve. And now I know that I will never settle for anything less than the love I deserve. As time went on, I realized that healing wasn't just about learning to trust others again. It was about learning to trust myself. For so long, I had been second-guessing my decisions, believing that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't worthy of the love I had been searching for. But now, I saw that the only thing I had to prove was to myself. I didn't need validation from anyone else. I didn't need to be someone's definition of good enough. I was good enough, just as I was. And that's where it started to click. For the first time, I was no longer afraid to be vulnerable. I didn't need to hide behind walls of defense or try to control every aspect of my life. I could be open, I could be real, and I could let myself be seen, not just for who I was in a relationship, but for who I was as an individual. I had spent years trying to mold myself into someone else's version of what I should be. I had dimmed my light to make room for someone else's ego. I had ignored my own desires, my own dreams, my own needs, because I was so wrapped up in trying to fix someone else. But the most powerful lesson I learned in all of this was that I wasn't responsible for someone else's happiness. I had tried to make Liam happy at the expense of my own joy, and it had left me broken. The truth is, you can't make someone else happy if they don't want to be happy themselves, and you certainly can't sacrifice your own happiness for someone else's approval. I had been living my life in a way that wasn't aligned with who I truly was. But now, I was taking the time to understand myself. I spent my evenings reading books that nourished my soul, listening to podcasts that inspired me, and diving into self-care practices that allowed me to heal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of spending time alone. In fact, I started to embrace it. I took up journaling again, like I used to before all the chaos. Writing helped me process everything I had been through. It helped me uncover the parts of myself I had buried for so long. And through writing, I started to understand the importance of being my own source of validation. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was enough. I was enough, just as I was. I also reconnected with the people who had been there for me through it all. My friends, especially Amelia, were a huge part of my support system. They had always been there, even when I had pushed them away. I realized that true friendships aren't about constant validation. They're about trust, understanding, and being there for each other, no matter what. I had taken them for granted in the past, but now I appreciated their love and support more than ever. One evening, Amelia and I went out for dinner, just like old times. We sat at a little cafe near the water, sipping wine and talking about life. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as we laughed about the small things. It was so easy with her. There was no pressure to be anyone but myself. She looked at me and said, "You've come a long way, Liv. I'm so proud of you." Those words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so much time feeling like I had let everyone down, like I had failed somehow. But here was Amelia, someone who had seen me at my lowest, telling me how proud she was of me. It was in that moment that I realized how far I had truly come. I wasn't the same person I had been when I was with Liam. I was stronger, wiser, and more aware of my own worth. Even though I was no longer in that toxic relationship, the healing process was ongoing. It wasn't a straight path. There were days when I still felt sadness creeping in, days when I missed the comfort of being with someone, even if that comfort had been false. There were moments when I found myself questioning if I had made the right choice, wondering if I would ever find love again. But then I would remember how far I had come. I would remember the woman I had rediscovered, the woman who loved herself first, the woman who no longer needed someone else to define her happiness. And when I met Elijah, it was like a breath of fresh air. I wasn't looking for him to fix me. I wasn't looking for him to validate me. He was just him. We didn't rush into anything. We took our time getting to know each other, respecting each other's boundaries, and building a connection based on trust. With Elijah, I felt like I could truly be myself. There was no pressure, no fear of being judged or controlled. He accepted me for who I was, flaws and all, and that was a feeling I hadn't experienced in so long. But even with Elijah, I knew that I couldn't rush into anything. I had learned that true love wasn't about rushing or forcing something to happen. It was about allowing things to develop naturally at their own pace. I wasn't seeking anyone to complete me anymore. I was complete on my own. And Elijah, he respected that. He didn't try to push me into something I wasn't ready for. He took the time to truly get to know me, to listen, to understand. We didn't need to rush. We had time. And the more time I spent with him, the more I realized that true love doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be this all-consuming fire. Sometimes it's the quiet moments, the comfortable silences, and the genuine connection that matter the most. As I spent more time with Elijah, I started to see how much I had grown. I had learned to trust again, not just in him, but in myself. I had learned to recognize the red flags, to trust my instincts, and to never settle for anything less than what I deserved. It was a slow process, but I was no longer afraid of taking risks in love. I wasn't afraid of getting hurt anymore, because I knew that no matter what happened, I had the strength to get through it. I was no longer the girl who needed someone else to complete her. I was Olivia, the woman who had found her own strength, her own voice, and her own happiness. I wasn't perfect. I still had moments of doubt, but I was learning to live with those moments, to embrace them as part of my journey. And as I sat on the couch with Elijah one evening, watching the sun set outside, I realized that I was finally ready for whatever came next. I didn't need to control it. I didn't need to force it. I just needed to be present. And that was enough. It was funny how the little things started to feel big again. The quiet mornings, the slow coffee brewing, the sound of laughter over a phone call with my mom. They had always been there, but for so long I hadn't seen them. I had been so lost in trying to make a toxic relationship work that I hadn't noticed how beautiful the simplicity of life really was. Elijah and I continued to take things slow, but there was something comforting in that. The pressure was gone. The fear was gone. We were just enjoying each other's company, building a friendship that had the potential to grow into something deeper, but without the urgency. That was the beauty of it. There was no rush. We weren't trying to fix broken pieces of each other. We were just learning to appreciate the beauty in our individual wholes. One evening, as we walked through the park near his place, I had this moment of clarity. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched beneath our feet. I had my arm linked through his, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel any anxiety, any fear. I didn't worry if I was saying the right thing, or if he was getting bored, or if he was losing interest. I felt safe. I felt seen. And it wasn't just because he was holding my hand. It was because I was holding my own heart, and I knew it was strong enough to withstand whatever life threw at me. At that moment, I realized just how far I had come. The woman walking through the park was nothing like the woman who had been trapped in a toxic relationship, trying to be someone else's definition of love. I was Olivia, the woman who had learned to love herself first, the woman who had walked away from something that was tearing her apart, and the woman who was slowly but surely learning to trust again. I had spent so many years trying to fix something that wasn't mine to fix. I had given pieces of myself to someone who would never appreciate them. But now, I was whole again. I wasn't perfect, but I was whole. And that felt like the greatest gift I could have ever given myself. As time passed, my relationship with Elijah continued to grow, but in a way that was healthy and balanced. We communicated openly, without fear of judgment or control. I was able to express my needs, and so was he. We didn't push each other to be anything we weren't. We just accepted each other, flaws and all. And while I wasn't ready to jump headfirst into another serious relationship just yet, I was open to the possibilities, knowing that I wasn't in a rush. I didn't need to rush. I was finally in control of my own happiness. And with that newfound sense of independence, I started reflecting on the past, on everything I had learned about myself, about relationships, about love. I had spent so much time feeling like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't worthy of love. I had believed the lies that toxic people had fed me. But now I could see clearly. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't broken. I was simply on a journey that was uniquely mine. That's when I realized that, in a way, everything I had gone through had led me to this moment. The pain, the heartbreak, the betrayal, it had all been part of the process. Without it, I wouldn't have found my strength. I wouldn't have learned to love myself. And I wouldn't have discovered what true love really is. True love isn't about filling a void. It's about two whole people coming together, supporting each other, and building a future together. But the foundation for that love has to be solid. It has to start with self-love. I'm not going to say everything is perfect now. Life doesn't work that way. There are still days when I miss the comfort of being in a relationship, days when the loneliness creeps in. But those days are fewer and fewer. Now, I know that the loneliness is just a temporary feeling. It's not a reflection of who I am. I am whole on my own, and that's something I never truly understood until now. My life is mine to shape. I've learned to let go of the need for external validation. I've learned that love is something that should lift you up, not tear you down. I've learned that true happiness comes from within. And while I'm still figuring things out, I know that I'm on the right path. The real test, though, is to continue on this path, no matter what. The test is to never settle for less than what I deserve. The test is to keep growing, to keep learning, and to keep loving myself. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm taking my time. I'm building a life that makes me proud. And no matter what happens, I'm going to keep moving forward, because I know now that I am enough. It wasn't long after that I started to feel the freedom in my bones. It wasn't the kind of freedom where everything feels perfect and you're just cruising through life. No. It was the kind of freedom where you can breathe again, where the weight you've been carrying, whether you knew it was there or not, starts to lift. It's like the fog clears and you begin to see the world around you in a whole new light. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to hide parts of myself or explain myself to anyone. For the first time in a long time, I was truly living for myself. I remember the first time I went out to dinner with a group of friends and realized how much I had missed these moments. Before, I would have been on edge, worried that someone would notice I wasn't paying enough attention to Liam or that he'd accuse me of something. But now, I was laughing without restraint, talking without hesitation, sharing stories without worrying about being judged. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. I was just me. Amelia noticed the change too. One afternoon, she and I were sitting in a cafe, sipping our coffees, and she looked at me with a knowing smile. "You've come a long way, Olivia," she said. "I haven't seen you this happy in years." It wasn't the first time she had said something like that, but this time it felt different. It felt like she had witnessed the full circle of my growth. The more time passed, the more I realized that healing wasn't just about fixing the broken parts of me. It was about embracing the idea that I didn't need to be fixed. I wasn't broken. I had been living under the assumption that I needed someone to complete me, that I needed external validation to feel worthy. But I had learned the hard way that the only validation that truly mattered was the one I gave myself. The realization was both empowering and humbling. It was empowering because I knew that I had everything within me to be happy, to be content, and to be enough. It was humbling because I understood that I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to chase after someone else's approval. All I had to do was show up for myself every day and let that be enough. There were days, of course, when I doubted myself. Days when the memories of Liam's manipulation crept back into my mind, and I wondered if I'd ever truly be able to trust again. But those days became less and less frequent as time went on. I learned to embrace those feelings without letting them define me. I understood that they were part of the healing process, that they didn't mean I hadn't made progress. They were just reminders of the strength I had gained through everything I had been through. One evening, after a particularly rough day, I was sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, just reflecting on everything. The world outside was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't consumed by thoughts of Liam or the mistakes I thought I had made. Instead, I felt a sense of peace, genuine peace. It wasn't something I had to search for. It was something I had built, step by step, over the past few months. I realized that I had finally reached a place where I could look back at my past and not feel ashamed. I could acknowledge the pain without letting it define me. I could look at the mistakes I had made without regretting them because they had shaped me into the person I was becoming. But even more than that, I realized something else. I was ready to open myself up to the possibility of love again. Real love. Not the kind that felt suffocating or manipulative. Not the kind that made me feel small or insignificant, but love that was built on mutual respect, understanding, and a willingness to grow together. I wasn't rushing into it, though. I knew that real love couldn't be forced, and I wasn't about to settle for anything that didn't make me feel whole. The most important thing was that I had learned to love myself, and that had changed everything. A few months later, I went on a few more dates. This time, it was different. I wasn't looking for someone to fix me. I wasn't looking for someone to fill the space that Liam had left. I was just looking to connect with someone who shared the same values, who wanted to build something meaningful, without the games or the manipulation. One of those dates was with a guy named Elijah. He wasn't anything like Liam. He wasn't controlling or possessive. He was kind, patient, and supportive. We talked about everything from our favorite books to our views on the world. It was easy, natural, and for the first time, I felt like I could really be myself without fear. I remember one moment during that date when he told me, "I admire how strong you are. I think you've been through a lot, but you've come out stronger for it." It wasn't just a compliment. It was recognition. It was someone seeing me for who I truly was, without the baggage of past relationships or the pressure of trying to impress. I wasn't being praised for my appearance or my accomplishments. I was being praised for my strength, and that felt better than anything else. But even with Elijah, I wasn't rushing. I wasn't trying to fit him into a mold of what I thought a relationship should look like. I wasn't trying to make him the one because I already was. I was enough, just as I was. And that made all the difference. It didn't mean I didn't face challenges. There were still moments when I doubted myself, moments when the past tried to creep back in. But the difference now was that I had the tools to deal with it. I knew how to take care of myself. I knew how to love myself. And I knew that the most important relationship I would ever have was the one I had with myself. So I moved forward, slowly, steadily, but with a heart full of hope. And that's the thing about healing. It's not a destination, it's a journey where you learn to embrace the scars, the bruises, and the lessons. It's a journey where you learn that you are worthy, no matter what you've been through. And it's a journey where you realize that the greatest love you can find is the one you give yourself. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know where my relationship with Elijah will go, or if it will even last. But I do know one thing for sure. I am no longer the person I was when I was with Liam. I am no longer someone who seeks validation from others. I am Olivia, the woman who has learned to love herself, to stand strong, and to move forward without fear. And that's enough.